السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. In this lecture, we will complete the master of endocrine glands, the pituitary gland, and study other parts of this gland, which are pars tuberalis, pars intermedia, and pars nervosa. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the light and electron microscopic structure of the cells of pars nervosa, pars tuberalis, and pars intermedia of the pituitary gland. And you should be able to correlate this structure of hormone secreting cells to their function. As we studied in the previous lecture, hormone secreting cells may be protein secreting cells or steroid secreting cells. So you must correlate the structure of these cells to their function and mention the connection between the hypothalamus and pars nervosa. The connection between the hypothalamus and pars nervosa. As we studied that pituitary gland formed of two parts, neurohypophysis and adenohypophysis. Neurohypophysis or posterior part and adenohypophysis or anterior part. Pituitary gland developed from two parts. The posterior part developed from the floor of diencephalon. The floor of diencephalon descend downward to form neurohypophysis, and the roof of the mouth form the adenohypophysis. This part or this invagination from the floor of the mouth form this invagination which we call the Raynaud's pouch, and this part separated completely from the roof of the mouth. But the part that is descend from diencephalon is still connected to this part and not separated completely from it to form the pituitary gland, which formed of these parts: pars distalis, pars tuberalis, pars nervosa, and the part in the middle called the pars intermedia. Parts of pituitary gland. Pituitary gland formed of two parts. Anterior part, which is called the adenohypophysis, and posterior part, which is called the neurohypophysis. This adenohypophysis, which developed from the roof of the mouth, separated completely from the roof of the mouth. But this neurohypophysis, which developed from the floor of diencephalon, still connected to it by infundibular stalk. So neurohypophysis formed of two parts: infundibular stalk, which is a narrow part to connect the pars nervosa by the hypothalamus, and this part which is called pars nervosa. Neurohypophysis formed of infundibular stalk and pars nervosa. And adenohypophysis formed from pars distalis, and this part which turn around infundibular stalk called pars tuberalis, and this part which lies in the middle called the pars intermedia. Again, pituitary gland formed of two parts: adenohypophysis, which formed from these three parts: pars distalis, pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis, and the neurohypophysis, which formed from infundibular stalk and pars nervosa. This is a light microscopic pictures to pituitary gland. Show the parts of pituitary gland. This part which formed of group of cells called the pars distalis, and these parts, which formed of nerve fibers and support neuroglial cells, called the pars nervosa, and this is the Rathek's pouch. This is also light microscopic picture to pituitary gland, showing all parts of the pituitary gland. This cellular part called pars distalis and pars intermedia, and this part which is neurohypophysis, infundibular stalk, and pars nervosa. This diagram shows the parts of pituitary gland. As we mentioned, pituitary gland is a parenchymatous organ formed of stroma and parenchyma. The stroma formed of capsule that surrounds the gland and separate it from surrounding structure, thin capsule, and centrapiculi, which descend from the capsule, and reticular network that form the background of the gland. The reticular network not stained by hematoxin and eosin. It's only stained by silver stain to appear as brown in color. And the parenchyma, which are formed of cells that secrete the hormones. This pituitary gland formed of two parts, adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. Adenohypophysis formed of pars distalis, pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis. And the neurohypophysis formed of infundibular stalk, which is narrow part, connect pars nervosa to hypothalamus, and this part called the pars nervosa. We studied in the previous lecture that pars distalis formed of two types of cells. Chromophobe cells, which have no affinity to stains. These cells act as a stem cells to other types of cells, or to chromophile cells. And the chromophile, which have affinity to stain, if the cells stained with hematoxin, called basophil. If stained with eosin, it's called acidophil. Basophil is large in size and less in number, but acidophil is smaller in size and more numerous. These cells separated by fenestrated blood capillaries. Fenestrated blood capillaries to take hormones directly to the blood circulation. Basophils secrete thyrotrophic hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicular stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. And acidophil secrete growth hormone and prolactin. These hormones secreted directly to blood circulation through these fenestrated blood capillaries. Pars tuberalis. Pars tuberalis is upward extension of pars distalis. Pars tuberalis, upward extension from the pars distalis, surround the infundibulum of the neurohypophysis. As the pars distalis contains many types of cells, from these cells, a type called gonadotrophs that secrete follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These pars tuberalis contain this type of cells only, gonadotrophs. And pars tuberalis rich in blood vessels to take the secretion of gonadotrophs directly to the blood circulation. Pars intermedia. Pars intermedia rudimentary in man. It's present only in some species. This part rudimentary in man. The cells of this part are arranged in the form of follicles. In the center of these follicles, a pseudophilic material called colloid present. The cells are polygonal in shape and arranged in follicles with colloid in the center or in the lumen of these follicles. Between the follicles, we will find fenestrated blood capillaries. To carry hormone secreted from these cells directly to the blood circulation. But the pars intermedia is poorly vascularized, not as pars tuberalis. Pars tuberalis rich in blood vessels, but pars intermedia is poorly vascularized. Pars intermedia, as we mentioned, present in some species other than man. So these species or pars intermedia in these species secrete melanocyte stimulating hormone. Pars nervosa. Pars nervosa is the posterior part of the pituitary gland. It's formed of group of axons surrounded by fenestrated blood capillaries. These axons are the axons of neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus. As the pars nervosa developed from downgrowth of the floor of the diencephalon, which descended to form the pars nervosa, but still connected to the hypothalamus or diencephalon. The cells of the hypothalamus secrete two hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. These hormones synthesized in these cells, in these neurosecretory cells, that release these hormones in the axons, and these axons release the hormones directly to the capillary network, to fenestrated capillary network that surround the axons to reach the circulation. So, hypothalamus connected to the pars nervosa. But are these hormones synthesized in the pars nervosa? No, these hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, synthesized in the neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus and then passes in the axons of these cells to reach pars nervosa to secrete these hormones directly in the blood circulation. What is the structures present in pars nervosa? The main structure in pars nervosa, the unmyelinated nerve fibers. These fibers or these nerve fibers are many axons of supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of hypothalamus. As any group of cells in the central nervous system, called nuclei. So we have two groups of cells in the hypothalamus called supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. Axons of these nuclei or these cells descend downward to the pars nervosa to form a tract called hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. As the pituitary gland called the hypophysis cerebri, so this tract called hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. These axons terminate close to the blood capillaries. As the secretion of these neurosecretory cells, which are antidiuretic and oxytocin hormones, descend in these axons or in this hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract to reach the blood circulation through this network of fenestrated blood capillaries that surround axon terminals. Hearing bodies or neurosecretory bodies. This acidophilic neurosecretion surrounded by membrane in axon terminal. As the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin secreted from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus and passes through the axons or hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract to reach the pars nervosa and store in the axon terminal in the form of these bodies, hearing bodies. This secretion, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, released from the neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus and passes in the axon to be stored in acidophilic structures surrounded by membrane in the axon terminal called hearing bodies. These hearing bodies contain antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. So these hearing bodies must be surrounded by fenestrated blood capillaries. Fenestrated blood capillaries to take these hormones directly to the blood circulation. Pituicytes. Pituicytes are small branched cells with pale cytoplasm. These cells have no secretory function. It's mainly supporting or neuroglial cells. This electron microscopic structure of the pars nervosa showing the axon terminal that contains the neurosecretion surrounded by fenestrated blood capillaries to take this secretion to the blood circulation, and this axon terminal surrounded by branched cells to support these axons. Branched cells called pituicyte. So this electron microscopic picture showing axon terminal, fenestrated blood capillaries, and pituicytes, which is the neuroglial cells of the pars nervosa. This showing the electron microscopic picture and light microscopic picture to pars nervosa of pituitary gland. This light microscopic picture showing the accumulated secretion, neurosecretion surrounded by membrane, and this acidophilic structure called hearing bodies, which is axon terminal, contains the accumulated secretion from the cells in the hypothalamus. And these branched cells, branched nucleated cells, which are the pituicytes or neuroglial cells of the pars nervosa. And this electron microscopic picture showing the axon terminals that contain the neurosecretion inside, and this axon terminal surrounded by fenestrated blood capillaries to facilitate the passage of these hormones directly to the blood, and branched cells, branched nucleated cells, which are supporting cells that present in the pars nervosa. Hormones in pars nervosa. Hormones in pars nervosa. Nuclei in the CNS mean collection of nerve cells. Collection of nerve cells. So we have two collection of nerve cells in the hypothalamus, supraoptic and paraventricular. Supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus. These cells or nuclei synthesize two hormones, vasopressin and oxytocin. Vasopressin is the other name of antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. These two hormones secreted or synthesized in these neurosecretory cells or supraoptic and paraventricular cells in the hypothalamus and transported down in the axons, bound to carrier protein called neurophysin. These hormones transported down in the axon, bound to carrier protein called neurophysin, and then stored in the axon terminal, in the form of herring bodies. As we mentioned, herring bodies, acidophilic structures surrounded by membrane and contain the neurosecretion that are vasopressin and oxytocin. These herring bodies surrounded by fenestrated capillaries in which the hormones released inside to reach the blood circulation. This axon terminal surrounded by a network of fenestrated capillaries in which the hormones released to reach the blood circulation. Vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. This hormone secreted from the supraoptic nucleus in the hypothalamus and released to blood circulation through the pars nervosa. The function of this hormone: smooth muscle contraction in the wall of blood vessels. Smooth muscle contraction in the wall of blood vessels. And from its name, antidiuretic hormone, as it causes reabsorption of water from the distal convoluted tubule and collecting tubules of the kidney. So it causes concentration of urine. This hormone causes reabsorption of water from the distal convoluted tubule and collecting tubule. So when this hormone decreased or defect in this hormone causes disease called diabetes insipidus. This disease characterized by polyuria, as the antidiuretic hormone causes, as the defect in the antidiuretic hormone causes more release of water from the distal convoluted tubules, and collecting tubules causes polyuria. So diabetes insipidus is a defect in antidiuretic hormone characterized by polyuria. If there is increase in the antidiuretic hormone, this causes smooth muscle contraction in the wall of blood vessels and increase the volume of water in the body. These two function when increased causes hypertension. Oxytocin is the second hormone secreted from the hypothalamus. This hormone secreted from the paraventricular nucleus in the hypothalamus and released to blood circulation through the pars nervosa. Function of this hormone: uterine contraction. This hormone stimulates the uterine contraction as occurs in labor, and also it causes contraction of myoepithelial cells around alveoli of the mammary gland. Uterine contraction and contraction of myoepithelial cells around alveoli of mammary gland. This causes milk ejection during lactation. Milk ejection, not milk secretion, as the hormone responsible for milk secretion is the prolactin. Which released from mammotrophs in the pars distalis, but oxytocin responsible for milk ejection, not milk secretion, as it causes contraction of myoepithelial cells around the alveoli of mammary gland. This is a drawing to hematoxylin and eosine stained section of the pituitary gland, showing that the pituitary gland is any parenchymatous organ formed of stroma and parenchyma. The stroma formed of thin capsule from connective tissues that surround the gland and separate it from surrounding structure, and from this capsule thin trabeculae descend to divide the gland into compartments and reticular network that form the background of the gland. but the reticular network cannot appear in this section as it's not stained by hematoxin and eosin, stained only by silver stain. Then the parenchyma or functioning part of the gland, which divide into pars distalis, pars tuberalis, pars intermedia, and pars nervosa. As we mentioned before, or in the previous lecture, pars distalis formed of chromophobe and chromophil. Chromophil may be basophil or acidophil. And pars tuberalis is upward extension from the pars distalis. These pars tuberalis rich in blood vessels and contain mainly the gonadotroph of the pars distalis. And this part called pars intermedia. This part rudimentary in men, present only in some species. This part or the cells in this part arranged in the form of follicles. In the lumen of these follicles, we will find colloid or acidophilic material called colloid. These pars intermedia poorly vascularized. Pars tuberalis rich in blood vessels, pars intermedia poorly vascularized. This part secrete melanocyte stimulating hormone. Pars nervosa contains these structures: unmyelinated nerve fibers, which are the axons of the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. And at the end of these axons, herring bodies, which is accumulated secretion of the oxytocin and vasopressin, which is secreted from the cells of hypothalamus. And fenestrated blood capillaries surrounding herring bodies to carry this secretion directly to the blood circulation. And pituicytes, which is the pituicyte neuroglial or supporting cells that surround the axon terminals. So pars nervosa formed of unmyelinated nerve fibers, herring bodies, pituicytes, and blood vessels or fenestrated blood capillaries. Now we have finished the lecture, and this is a quiz on the lecture. Hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract carries. This tract between the hypothalamus and pars nervosa. In this tract carries the secretion of the nuclei in the hypothalamus, which are oxytocin and vasopressin. So the right answer, letter B, oxytocin. And herring bodies which are present in pars nervosa. These herring bodies carries inhibitory and releasing hormones from the hypothalamus. No, these hormones carried to the pars distalis, not pars nervosa. Connect the hypothalamus to pars distalis. Carries prolactin and growth hormone. These two hormones secreted from the pars distalis. Carries oxytocin and vasopressin. Yes, this is the right answer. Letter D. The right answer, letter D, as the herring bodies carries oxytocin and vasopressin, which is secreted from the nuclei in the hypothalamus. Source of secretion in pars nervosa. We mentioned that there is no secretory cells in pars nervosa. The secretion comes from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus. So the right answer, letter C, supraoptic nucleus in the hypothalamus. Not acidophil or basophil, they are present in the pars distalis. Pars nervosa include all the following except. As we mentioned, pars nervosa contain pituicytes, herring bodies, unmyelinated axons, but not chromophil. So the right answer, letter C, chromophil. as chromophile present in pars distalis, not pars nervosa. Hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract connects the hypothalamus with this tract, which contain axons that take the secretion from the cells in the hypothalamus to the pars nervosa. So this tract connects the hypothalamus with the pars nervosa. The right answer, letter B. Pars nervosa contains somatotroph and chromophobe. No. Corticotroph and herring bodies. No corticotrophs in pars nervosa. Spongiocytes and supraoptic nuclei. They are not present in pars nervosa. Pituicytes and herring bodies. These two structures from the structures in the pars nervosa. So the right answer, letter C, Pituicytes and herring bodies. A 30-year-old patient complaining of polyuria and hypotension. Which of the following could be the cause? Supraoptic nucleus, gonadotrophs, mammotrophs, somatotrophs. Somatotrophs release growth hormone, mammotroph release prolactin, and gonadotroph release follicular stimulating and luteinizing hormone. Supraoptic nucleus secrete the antidiuretic hormone, which causes reabsorption of water from the distal and collecting tubules in the kidney. Distal convoluted and collecting tubules in the kidney. So when there is defect in this hormone, this causes polyuria and hypotension, as there is more secretion of water from the kidney tubules, which causes polyuria and hypotension. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.